This, I'm sorry, this is an older PowerPoint program. I'm planning on revising it this summer. I just haven't had time to do it lately, so some of this is old information, but it's all up to date. It's all basically good stuff. So, commercial orchard culture versus backyard orchard culture. So we talked about some of the differences and some of the conflicting information earlier. So let's look at some commercial things here first. So some of the things that I described earlier, everybody's thinking, oh, you just do that in your backyard. But when you start looking at some of the things that the commercial growers have done, some of the techniques that they've used, commercial growing methodology is coming a lot closer now to backyard methodology than it ever had before on spacing. They are not planting trees on big wide spacings anymore. They're not leaving 15-foot roadways anymore. They've brought their road spacing down considerably and their tree spacing down considerably, and they're using much smaller equipment than they used to. So some of these techniques that we used to think were just a backyard technique, like a crossover. Crossover technique is basically where you grow your tree up into a double and you bring one branch over the other. So one goes up to the left, one goes up to the right, and they cross over each other. This gives you the ability to grow a small tree that can hold a large amount of fruit. So on a small tree like this that's no more than 8 feet high, they can easily grow 250 to 350 pounds of peaches.
Wow.
So low scaffold. I'm talking about growing trees low and manageable for your backyard. And everybody thinks, well, commercial growers have big trees. Commercial growers do not have big trees, and they have not had big trees in years. So what they're doing when they plant a commercial tree now, they cut it off at about 16 or 18 inches high, and they grow low scaffolding. So here it is. Here it's demonstrated. That scaffold's only about 12 inches high, and the branching comes off from there. They're not growing a fruit tree. They're really growing a big fruiting bush. But they want that low, manageable scaffolding so that, again, they can do most of their work from the ground. So growing small trees, not just a backyard technique. It's been commercially acceptable for decades. Espalier styles. This one's horizontal oblique cordon. This is a style they used a lot in Europe. It's also a style that's being used a lot up in Washington State right now, and even up in Northern California in the Rio Vista district on pears. So these are apple trees that are planted at 5 feet apart on center, and they're grown out. The trees are planted in at a 45-degree angle, and they're grown on an espalier 3-wire system. So everything's grown and maintained on that trellis system. So you have nice, tight trees. You're not growing a single tree, you're growing a commercial hedge. So this is a technique that's been used, hedge styles have been used commercially for hundreds of years. Not new at all. Again, that's another similar apple methodology, 5 feet on center. You can see there's no shortage of fruit on trees grown on tight spacings. Everybody always says, well, if I grow a small tree and it's on tight spacing, I'm going to get less fruit. How much fruit can you use? How much do you want? Commercial guys are doing it and getting huge crops off of it. There's no reason why you should expect to get any less than what you can use, as long as you're dedicating the right amount of space to the tree. So don't be intimidated by trees on tight spacings. Tertiary system. This is one they use a lot for grapes. This one happens to be plums, or they're actually pluots. So what it is a post and wire system using a 6-foot post, actually an 8-foot post, 2 feet in the ground, 6 feet above, and then a T-bar at 3 feet and a T-bar at 6 feet with wires running off of those T-bars. So the plant's grown to no more than about 7 feet high. All that growth is put out onto those wires so that everything gets equal amount of light exposure and air movement, so that all the fruit ripens up with the same type of exposure. You get good quality fruit all the way around because exposure and air movement's good. Perpendicular V, this is another system that was designed for holding a lot of fruit. You can see, again, the trees were cut low. They were brought out at a double. And these trees at 8 feet high, the whole top's taken out every year at 8 feet high. So all this growth here will be pruned out this coming winter. So the trees are maintained so that, and you can see how close these are in the row. These are only about 3 feet apart. These are about 6 feet apart. in the row. So again, tight spacing, a lot of trees per acre. Trees are grown in a small size. Everything's maintainable and manageable from the ground. Hedgerow apricots. This is up in just outside of Modesto, on the west side of Modesto, California. So these rows are were 12 feet apart. These trees are 8 feet apart in the row. So you've got nice long rows of apricots. These trees are all summer pruned. The apricot growers and the cherry growers up in the San Joaquin Valley now don't do any winter pruning. Zero winter pruning, because there's too much spread of bacterial problems during the winter. So if they go from tree to tree to tree and it's wet and it's foggy and it's rainy and they have Eutypa or some sort of bacterial infection problem, they'll spread it from tree to tree. If they do this work in the summer, cherries and apricots are a great candidate for that because they ripen early. They ripen in April, May, and June. And usually by the end of June, they're done. There are a few later varieties, but not many. So they can come in July and just top these trees mechanically down to 7 or 8 feet high, get a little bit of regrowth in the summer, so you've got all this nice regrowth through the summer, and that's your fruiting wood again for the next season. So these hedgerow techniques are extremely important for commercial agriculture at this point. They're not growing big, tall trees anymore. Even the avocado growers now that used to grow 40, 50, 60-foot trees, they're at a point where the liability insurance companies have come in and said, "You got people going up there to pick fruit?" And they said, "Yep, that's where our avocados are, up there, about 25, 30 feet up." And the liability insurance company said, "You know what? Your policy's canceled. We can't insure anybody to go up there and pick fruit." So what did they do? They had old trees on old spacings, 20, 25 feet apart. So they came in and they said, "Okay, let's take these trees and we'll cut them back down to about 4 feet high." And you guys have seen it. Go drive down through Escondido, drive down through Fallbrook. I can take you on 20 back roads in San Diego County and show you where this is being done on a regular basis. They cut them down to 4 feet high. They whitewash that structure. They grow out a nice low tree. And then where the trees were planted 20 feet apart, they plant 2 new trees in the middle. So now they've got 3 times as many trees per acre. The trees are maintained at no more than 10 or 12 or 15 feet high. And their yield has gone up by over 50%.
Wow. How far apart?
So, well, where they used to, if they were 20 feet apart, now you've got 3 trees in that 20 feet.
You have a fruit.
So all they're doing is growing a big hedge, making a big hedgerow out of it. So they can maintain the trees easily, they can harvest fruit easily. The liability insurance company signed off on it and said, "Yep, we'll insure you to go, with a 10 or 12 foot ladder and pick fruit, but no higher than that." And their yield went up considerably. So a little bit more money for property development, a little bit more money to put in extra trees and extra irrigation and things like that. But when you consider what they're making, they're happy as can be. In fact, a lot of these guys are planting at 6 feet apart now, planning on taking out every other tree after 8 or 10 years. And they don't care. The price of that other tree, that more than paid for itself by sitting there for that first 8 or 10 years. They got more than enough harvest off it to make that tree worthwhile. So commercial techniques coming back to what we've been recommending for backyard growers for decades. Question?
What kind of effect is compressing the area with more trees having with water conservation? So is it reducing the evaporation rate? Are you having to water less because you have more trees?
Oh, absolutely. And you're watering, they're directly watering each tree. So, they're not running anything off. They're making good use of all their irrigation water. Irrigation water in agriculture. People, when the drought started, everybody looked at agricultural and said, "You guys waste water." Agriculture doesn't waste water. Agriculture is the biggest conservator of water in the state. They've been so concerned with how much water they're using and how much water they're pumping. I mean, yeah, it's less expensive for them if they own their own well, but they still have pumping costs and delivery costs and infrastructure to set up to move that water. I don't know anybody in commercial agriculture that I would say waste water. That's a ridiculous statement to even begin to say. Predominant central leader. This was an old-fashioned technique where they would grow peach trees up or apple trees up and grow all that fruiting wood off the side of a predominant central leader. So this can easily be done on trees that are kept at 12 feet or less. And again, you're making good use of that space. You can go down and harvest with using guys on trailers to harvest that fruit because everything's right there where they can pick it on either side of the trailer. And they're, you know, they're easy to manage, and they're making really, really good use of the amount of space that they have. Perpendicular V, 3 feet apart on center. These are Bartlett pears. The interesting thing about this orchard is it is now over 100 years old.
Wow.
So this is up outside of Sacramento, and these trees were planted in, I think it was 1911 or 1912. So the orchard itself is over 100 years old. Incredible harvest off of this orchard. In fact, these guys sell their fruit to a couple of mail order companies. If you bought those expensive, those $3 pears that you get mail order, a lot of them may have come out of this guy's orchard. So, you know, everybody thinks, oh, new technique, you know, perpendicular V, 3 feet apart. That's new technology. Here it is, planted over 100 years ago. Summer pruning, new technique. I got this out of the Fruit Grower magazine. Well, I think it was July 1958. So your new technique has been done for almost 60 years, and everybody understood the value of commercial topping on trees. Drive down through the local citrus orchards and look. Every summer you look at them and they look like they're squared off. What happened? Well, this is what happened. This equipment went in there and managed the orchard. So commercial orchards are being kept at smaller and smaller sizes, and have been for decades. We just really didn't realize it. And now we're looking at why are we growing our backyard trees like this? Why are we growing a Fuji apple up to 30 feet high when there's no way to manage that fruit? So think small. Bring it back down. Bring it back down to what's manageable for you. And I'm not saying don't grow a 30-foot tree. I'm saying keep it manageable for you. If 30 foot is manageable and you want to go way up there and pick your Fuji apples or your Santa Rosa plums, be my guest. Been there, done that, not doing anything. Time to prune. Everybody says you got to prune in the wintertime. This is an apple orchard in Woodstock Valley, Connecticut, owned by my good friend Norman Heckler. You think Norman's going out today to prune? I don't think so. Interesting thing is, when you look at these trees, they've been structured nicely for years. You've got all this long whippy growth that all has to be pruned off. Now Norman could have just as easily gone out there and done this in October or November, right after his harvest, instead of allowing those trees to overwinter like that. Now he's going to have to find time in between snowstorms and spring bloom to go out and do his work, when he could have done it easily in the fall when the weather conditions are right. So wintertime, time to prune? Not anymore. I don't think so. That methodology is long gone. So how much fruit can one tree produce? 18-foot apple tree can yield 350 pounds of fruit. 700 half-pound apples. So 700 half-pound apples. That's an awful lot of fruit. So did anybody eat 2 apples a day all of last year? I didn't think so. 700 half-pound apples. That's 6 pies per apple. That's 116 apple pies. Did anybody eat an apple pie every 3 days last year? It does sound good. I'd like to give it a try, but I don't think my waistband will go for it. So I think the thing is, kind of comically introduced here, is what do we do with all the fruit? What do we do with a commercial yield of fruit? We already talked about it. None of us need a commercial yield of fruit. None of us have that expectation. So don't worry that you're not going to get 350 pounds of apple off your Pink Lady apple tree. Just worry that you're going to get the right amount for you and your family. And successive ripening is the key. Having a little bit of fruit all the time instead of a lot of fruit at any one given time. So now let's look at some of the backyard techniques. We talked about rootstocks, what their importance is. We talked about our standard Santa Rosa plum or standard Fuji apple. Well, there's your 30-foot standard Fuji apple right there. It's my good friend Ed Livo, who is the same size as me, 5'7" or 5'8". So do you think Ed wants to go up 30 feet to pick that? So what's the solution? Let's get a semi-dwarf, right? There's our semi-dwarf. There's our semi-dwarf. So now, again, you don't have to climb up 30 feet, but you got to climb up almost 20. I don't want to do that either. I'm out. I'm not doing it. So let's get a dwarf apple. 12 feet high. Okay, that's better. It's manageable, but it's still almost twice as tall as I want. So what's my solution? What am I gonna do when standard, semi-dwarf, and dwarf don't keep the tree small enough for me to maintain it properly? I understand that that responsibility is not that of the tree, but my own responsibility in keeping that tree size controlled so that it works for me. So don't be intimidated by pruning. Those big loppers that you have in the garage that are gaining rust and probably behind the leaf blower and the broom to sweep out the garage, those are your friend. Get them out, oil them, sharpen them up. Don't be intimidated by using them.
What's the best way to prune? Is it a good idea to go to like rare fruit growers and take classes on pruning citrus and fruit trees?
The best way to prune is whatever works best for your particular landscape design. Because again, you're not a commercial grower. You don't have a commercial expectation. Don't get hung up on pruning. There are all kinds of great books out there on the basics of pruning. There's that old Sanford Martin book that Ken Anderson and David Ross redid a few years ago. And I actually worked with them a little bit on that. It's all methodology. It's all style. But you know what? It all goes back to commercial use. It all goes back to commercial style. So for me, none of it really made proper sense for what I do in my landscape, because I'm maintaining trees differently than any commercial grower would maintain. So when Martin wrote the book back in 1950, he was looking at something completely different. So you can get books and you can get information on methodology, but don't let that hold you up. Don't let that slow you down, because you need to make it work for whatever your purpose is and whatever your style and your function is. It's more important to consider that than to consider what somebody's methodology was 50 years ago. So we go right into this, Wizard of Ozology. There's no book written on it. There's nobody that is telling us how to do it, because it's all things that we've been doing for years in our backyards and in our landscapes. But nobody's ever made a science out of it. So I'm the first one to tell you that you're not going to find what you want in a book. You're going to find what you want by spending time in your landscape, by getting to know your trees. You're going to get to know how those trees grow, where the fruiting and flowering wood comes from. When you have problems, the more time you spend out there with your trees, the more you get to recognize, when did it bloom? When did it set fruit? When was that fruit ripe? When did I have issues? When did the codling moth show up on the apples? When was there an issue that I had to deal with? And the only way you're going to ever figure that out is by spending time out there. Nobody's going to come and tell you, remember those Washington navel oranges are ripe right now. You got to pick them right now, get them off the tree before they start to drop. You get to know that by spending time out there. Cut an orange open, take a bite. Is it still sour? Then don't eat anymore. As soon as the flavor's good, eat more. So you'll get to know when things ripen up only by being there and experiencing it. So here's a 10-year-old Santa Rosa plum, and most of this growth has grown out in the last season, so let's make it manageable. Let's bring it down in size. You can see how it was started. Look at that low canopy. So the first cut was made low. This has been grown out for 10 years. We're going to look at this tree a little bit more as we go through here. Thinning. I think thinning is also really important, and you can make cuts. So you can see all the fruit that's been thinned here on the ground. That fruit's all about nickel size, which is really a little bit too late. But then we look at what's in my hand there, that one branch that's about 2 feet long, and there's probably 15 fruit on that branch. So instead of standing there and doing this and this and this, one cut, thin 15 fruit off the tree. So don't be intimidated by thinning. Get out there and open it up a little bit. Allow some light exposure. Allow some air movement. And 1 or 2 cuts like that can do the work that it would take you 5 minutes to stand there and hand pick. So that's my preferred method of thinning right there. So planting. This is raised bed, so we're getting that root system up above the native soil. Prune knee high. This is something that you want to be careful with. So this is a 1 year, what we call a yearling bare root tree. And I'd have no problem taking that yearling bare root tree and cutting it off right there and regrowing a nice low structure on that tree. But you don't want to go to the retail nursery and buy an older tree and do that, because you may not have any viable growth buds in the lower 18 or 24 inches on that trunk. So you may cut off all the growing structure of that tree. If it's a 2-year or 3-year or 4-year tree, that's not the right cut to make. This is only the cut to make on a 1-year-old tree.
Can I ask you a question? Can you do the same in a pot?
Yes.
Yeah.
So remember that Santa Rosa plum that was 10 years old? Here it is in its first year. And my friend Ed Livo, he did this on a bet with a nurseryman up in Northern California that told him, you can't keep a Santa Rosa plum tree small. It's a big tree and it's not going to stay small, even on a semi-dwarfing rootstock. And Ed said, I can't keep it small and I'll prove it to you. So he took a series of photos, 1 year. You can see Ed's evolution in this 10 years too. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. So that's the same tree. The tree's still there today. This photo was 10 years ago probably. And we've kind of made it into a pet project. Here it is at 12 years. This is Harbir Singh. He's actually a commercial sales rep for us now. And he started out just as a field runner for us. And when he first started, anybody that starts the first year, we now give them this tree and say, prune this tree. And he said to me, I don't know how to prune this tree. And I gave him a pair of hedge clippers. And I said, just go prune the tree. So he did it. It looks kind of like a loaf of bread. I thought it was really neat. Still manageable. It was a nice style. So now everybody that comes on, if we get an intern or if we get a new employee, we hand them the hedge clippers and say, go prune the Santa Rosa. So canopy starts at knee high. That's where you want to be to keep a low structure. If you start off with a high canopy, you'll always end up with a high tree. So low canopies. So when you're buying a tree in a nursery, if it's a 2 or 3 year old tree, don't look for the one that looks like a shade tree. Look for the one that has a nice low branching structure and take the top out of it. Again, leave that low branching structure and start to maintain a nice low scaffold for you. So here's Craig's Crimson Cherry, pruned at about 7.5 feet. Here's my friend Richard. He owns Front Yard Nursery up in Placerville, which is about a 20-acre wholesale retail nursery operation up off of Highway 50. He has a big, long parking lot that's all done in this kind of pipe rail fence. And he just said, well, I think I'm going to grow some fruit trees along the fence. So he planted them about 12 inches off the fence. And he said, I'm going to just do, he kind of coined a phrase, casual espalier. Casual espalier, what does that mean? He goes, I'm not going to structure it on anything. Just any growth that goes out this way and that way I'm going to cut off, and any growth that goes out this way and that way I'm going to leave on. So I'm not going to put it on a wire, I'm not going to put it on a trellis, I'm not going to attach it to the fence, I'm just going to grow it out along the fence. So in about a 400-foot long fence area, he's got probably, I'm going to say, close to 50 trees that are just grown out along this fence. Really nice, really good use of space. Again, everybody was concerned, how much fruit am I going to get? Am I going to get enough fruit off of a small tree? This is Kristen Camarena. She works in our office. She's standing next to about a 10-year-old heavenly white nectarine. Kristen's about 5'2", so you can see where that tree is maybe 6 feet max or a little over 6 foot max. Does it look like it has a bad fruit set? Those fruit were as big as softballs, and there were about 200 fruit on that little tree. So even on small trees, you can expect good sized fruit, good quality fruit, and a good crop of fruit. Space saving, high density. We talked about multi-planting. Here's 4 peach trees in one hole, 18 inches apart. So you've got a May, a June, a July, and an August variety all planted there together. So 3.5 months worth of successive ripening peaches, all in the footprint of one tree. So these are apples or pears at 18 inches apart. Here's 4-in-1 cherry, 2 years. Here's 4-in-1 cherry, 6 years. Here's 4-in-1 cherry at 11 years. That's the same combination. So kept at a nice, small, manageable size. So high density pruning and planting combined, peach, nectarine, apricot. So 3 trees again in the space of 1. High density plus size control equals backyard orchard culture. 3 and 1, 24 inches apart, peach nectarine apricot. Cherry peach plum, 24 inches apart. 6 trees in 10 feet, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3 and 1 combinations. Multi-budded fruit trees, we talked about those. We talked about the key to success. So when you look at this tree, it's a 2-year multi-bud fruit tree. Here's the dominance, here's the big, vigorous branch. It's already been cut off at about 6 feet. Now here's the weak one right here. You can see that's only about 18 inches. So next thing to do, make that cut. Remember I said, no variety should be any more dominant than the weakest variety on the tree. So you got to cut vigor back to match the weakest variety. So there that tree is. Never let one variety dominate. Here it is after a couple of seasons in the ground. There it is in its second dormant season in the ground. And you can see now it's pretty well established. Even the weak bud and the other grafts are all at about the same size. So the weak bud's now been established to catch up with the dominant bud. You're not going to make a weak variety faster. You're going to make a dominant variety slower. Cut back and thin in the spring. We talked about that with thinning. 3 and 1 fruit salad. That's I think that was the same one. It's apricot, peach nectarine. 2 and 1 pluot, flavor king, flavor queen. Again, a lot of these multi-budded combinations that we put together, we put varieties together that will cross-pollinate with each other. So if you've got a multi-budded plum or a multi-budded apple or multi-budded pear, multi-budded pluot, they're all varieties that will cross-pollinate with each other. So you've got your cross-pollination built into the combinations. High-density hedgerows. This is 12 trees and 40 feet, 3 feet on center. These are plums and pluots, 2 feet on center. This is the last part of that. These were 18 inches on center. And this was a project that we grew out and maintained for a while. We kind of neglected it for a couple of years. So here it is in fruiting season in the summer. Here it is after we neglected it for a couple of years and didn't do anything with it. So the orchard manager came to me and said, hey, you got a choice. Either I'm going to take the bulldozer in there and cut that hedgerow out of there, or you got to do something with it. So we got out the chainsaw and we took everything back down to basic structure. So here, basic structure, about 5 feet high. We did have one tree that was in the middle there that didn't look very good. We thought we could save it. We cut it down to, well, where it had green structure, but you can see that actually we lost that one tree. So one casualty, but look how nice the rest of them look. You know, after that, you know, severe chainsaw issue there, now we've regrown them in one season to a nice, manageable structure. So you can take an old orchard and you can rejuvenate it. This is done all the time in commercial agriculture when trees get too big, just like we talked about what they're doing with the avocado trees. If a commercial peach grower or an apple grower or somebody, if their trees get too big, they come in, they don't cut them back to 8 feet or 6 feet. They come back in and they cut them down to 3 or 4 feet and they completely regrow the structures on those trees. So rejuvenation is a common practice in commercial agriculture. So more fruit in less space, pollinating varieties, successive ripening, fruit all season, easy maintenance, endless aesthetic possibilities. Be creative. This is 4 peaches planted in a mulch pile. Well, basically, we didn't even dig a hole. We just dumped a skip loader bucket full of mulch down and put 4 trees in it and put some irrigation on it. So here it is after the first season. Raised beds for cherries, things that don't like heavy wet soil, so raised bed or mounded plantings always work. Mulch inside the bed and outside the bed as well. There it is after 3 years. This is kind of an interesting project that Mike Tomlinson did for us. this guy right here, he's an artist. He manages our photo library and all the photos on our website, and all the videos that you see posted to davewilson.com. Mike's the guy that did all those videos. So he came to us when he first started, and he said, I'm going to go over by a couple minutes. Is that okay? All right. He came to us and said, hey, I want to grow some pluots. You know, we've got this area down there that we don't really use for the nursery. Can I plant some stuff down there? And we said, yeah, you can plant some stuff down there. You probably want to do it in a raised bed, because that's right up here where this tree line is the Tuolumne River. And in years when we do get a good snowpack, the Tuolumne River will overflow into this area in the spring. So do a raised bed. He said, oh great. He goes, you got any kind of a budget where I can buy some stuff to create a raised bed? We all laughed at him and said, no, but you can use anything you find down there. So he went down and started collecting all these riverbed rocks and some tree stumps and some big old pieces of driftwood, and he created all these raised beds down there. And, you know, it may not be the look you want for your backyard, but the function's there. And honestly, I kind of like the looks of it. I think it's pretty neat to make good use of that space and build that raised bed at the same time. So Mike's done a lot of these projects down there, and they're all still there, and they're all successful. And, you know, kind of a nice kidney-shaped mound here with 1, 2, 3, 4 trees in it, or 5 trees in it. So making good use of space that wouldn't have been used before. Mulching, there's 4 trees in a small mound, you know, and mulching inside, mulching outside. There's mulch right there. That's mulch, all right. Healthy roots in the mulch. Covering techniques, that's not important. That's for freeze or hail. I don't think we have a big problem with that down here. So I'll go through that real quick. Bird netting might be something you'd want to consider if you have issues with birds. And again, if I'm going to grow a 7-foot tree, I can easily go out and throw a bird net over it and bring it down and tie it off at the base. If I've got an 18-foot tree, how am I going to do that? So again, small size wins.
Do rats get through that?
They would, yes. This is a spellier along a fence. This is an apricot tree that was just grown on a chain link fence. So it's about 8 feet high and about 12 feet wide, and comes out from the fence by about 12 inches. There's a fig tree done in the same fashion. This is actually the Master Gardener program up in Fair Oaks, east of Sacramento. And they've got some people that love to do espaliers. So these are all European and Asian pears. They've done birdcage style, they've done candelabra style. It's a really neat project. If you're ever up there, I encourage you to go and visit this. They've done some great arbors that are just spectacular. So really, really nice. Deer fencing, I don't think that's a big issue. If it is, contact me. Double flowers, so here's some double flowering varieties. Red Baron peach, Saturn peach, mid-pride peach, all fall into that double flowering category. This is my braided fig tree. So that's actually 3 varieties. It's a white, a black, and a yellow all together. So you get 3 different types of figs off of one braided trunk.
How long did it take for that to...
That was about probably 6 years old when that photo was taken. There it is, when he was young. That was about in the 2nd or 3rd year right there. Blueberries, we talked about blueberries in detail, the soil mix, how important that is. Container culture works better than in-ground. This is my parting shot here. This is a really interesting tree. There's actually 5 of these trees in a row, and they're black walnut trees that were planted up in the Central Valley by a farmer that wanted to grow his own walnut orchard. He had 3,000 acres of land, and he didn't want to waste any valuable space on growing rootstock trees, so he planted these 5 black walnuts in between a farm road and an irrigation ditch here, and they run in a row out along this way. They were planted in 1902. So, and again, I would say this is a casual espalier. He never put them on a trellis system. He just merely, anything that grew out this way, he cut off, and anything that grew up and out along that way, he left on. So here they are, 100 and, almost 115 years later, still in the ground. About 20-some years ago, when I was doing some consulting for Disney, when they were putting in the California Adventure theme park, they wanted to incorporate fruit trees into that, and they wanted to do some espalier. And I showed them this slide. And after the presentation, the big mouse guy came up to me and he gives me one of his cards and he says, "We want to buy those trees." Those trees, at the time the trees were almost, they were 95 years old or something, 90 years old. And I said, you can't. He says, "Oh, no, you don't understand. We have unlimited resources and funding." He goes, "We can do anything we want to do." He wrote down a number on the back of his business card and he gave it to me. He goes, "I want you to offer them this for those 5 trees, and we'll do everything. We'll do all the work and all the moving and handle take all the responsibility." I looked at the card and I thought, it's worth a phone call. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, Disney wants to buy your grandfather's trees. They want to put them at the California Adventure theme park." Well, this is a 3rd-generation ag family in the San Joaquin Valley that have been very successful and done very well. With 3,000 acres of walnuts, you can make a fair amount of money. So they said, "No, we don't want to accept that offer, but thanks, tell them thanks, and they can come up and look at the trees anytime they want." So honestly, if they were my trees, you could see them today at Disney's California. Because it was a very, very healthy offer, and hey, you know what? I grow trees for a living. I can grow some more. So. But anyway, that's my speech, and I'm sticking to it. The basics of that.
My heart be still. It's always good. Thanks again. There's more announcements, but thanks, Tom, for coming.
My pleasure.
Wow.